They came to prove their superiority on Earth, but the first soldier took 3 steps and his skeleton collapsed. There I was, standing in the Grand War Chamber of the Kalrathi High Command, watching Commander Thexvar strut around like he owned the entire galaxy, which, to be fair, he kind of thought he did. The holographic display flickered in front of us, showing that little blue marble the humans called Earth, and I swear you could hear the smugness radiating off every scale on his body. "Gentlemen," Thexvar announced, his forearms spread wide in that theatrical way he loved so much, "we are looking at the softest, weakest, most pathetically fragile species to ever crawl out of a gravity well." The council chamber erupted in clicking laughter. General Crosstex slapped his thorax so hard I thought he might crack a rib plate, which given our species' natural armor was basically impossible, but that was the mood in the room. Pure confidence. Absolute certainty that we were about to deal with the galactic equivalent of gelatinous prey animals. "Commander," Science Adjunct Vex Lin chimed in, his voice dripping with that particular condescension only academics can truly master. "My preliminary studies indicate that human bone density is approximately 43% lower than our own. Their muscle fiber composition is, shall we say, laughably inadequate. They do not possess exoskeletons. They have no natural armor plating, and their healing factor is so slow it might as well not exist." Thexvar nodded, his mandibles clicking in approval. "Exactly. Which is why I propose we conduct our elite force training directly on their homeworld. Think of it. We will adapt to their gravity. We will master their environment, and we will demonstrate to the entire galactic assembly that the Kalrathi Empire can conquer any condition, any planet, any species. Now, here is where it gets good. Or bad, depending on your perspective and how much you enjoy watching military disasters unfold in real time." Lieutenant Praxval, bless his cautious little heart, raised one of his secondary arms. "Sir, the human delegation did send us a warning. They suggested that our physiological differences might make surface operations, and I quote, extremely hazardous to our health." The laughter that followed nearly shook the deck plating. "Oh, they warned us," Thexvar bellowed, his voice thick with mockery. "How precious, how absolutely adorable. The humans, who cannot even survive a decent electrical storm without their primitive shelters, are warning us, the Kalrathi, about physical hazards." Krostek was practically wheezing now. "What do they think will happen? That we will melt? That their rain will dissolve our superior genetic structure? Perhaps," Vexelin added with a sneer, "they believe their gravity will somehow inconvenience us. As if an additional 0.7 standard units of gravitational force could possibly affect a species evolved under 1.4 standard units. I remember thinking, even then, that maybe, just maybe, we should listen to the weird little bipeds. But who was I? Just a documentation officer, required to record the proceedings for posterity, and what a recording this was going to be."
Thexvar slammed his primary fist onto the command table, causing the hologram to flicker and reset. "It is decided. We will select our finest warriors, 200 of the elite Kalrathi Shock Division. We will equip them with our most advanced combat gear. We will land on Earth. We will conduct our training exercises, and we will show the humans and everyone else watching that the Kalrathi Empire bows to no environmental condition."
The council voted unanimously. Of course they did. Not a single one of them had actually bothered to read the full human medical report. Not one of them had questioned why the humans had been so insistent, almost desperate in their warnings. We just assumed they were being paranoid or perhaps trying to hide some weakness they thought we might exploit. Oh, how spectacularly wrong we were. The selection process for the Kalrathi Shock Division was predictably brutal and efficient. Thexvar personally reviewed 3,000 applications from our most decorated warriors. These were not your average soldiers, mind you. These were veterans who had conquered 17 hostile worlds, who had survived atmospheric conditions that would liquefy most carbon-based life forms, who had endured temperatures ranging from -200 to +400 degrees. Sergeant Kelvath, who would later become somewhat infamous for reasons I will explain shortly, had personally led 43 successful planetary invasions. Captain Drenox had once fought for 16 consecutive hours in a gravity field of 2.8 standard units without breaking a sweat, or whatever the Kalrathi equivalent of sweating is. These were not soft individuals. These were the absolute peak of Kalrathi military excellence. The medical augmentation phase was equally impressive, if you are into that sort of thing. Dr. Vosmar, Our chief field surgeon subjected each soldier to a battery of enhancements that would have killed lesser beings just from the preparation protocols alone: reinforced skeletal plating, enhanced cardiovascular systems, upgraded respiratory efficiency, the works. We are making them better than perfect, Vossmore declared, watching as another soldier emerged from the augmentation chamber, his scales gleaming with fresh biogel coating. By the time we are finished, these warriors will be able to operate in any environment the galaxy can throw at them. The equipment loadout was similarly excessive. Each soldier received a Mark VII combat exoskeleton, which, according to the manufacturer specifications, could enhance strength by a factor of 3 and distribute gravitational stress across the entire frame. They got gravity compensators, atmospheric processors, full medical diagnostic suites built into their armor, and enough redundant systems to make a starship engineer jealous. HFY inspected the assembled force 3 days before departure, strutting between the ranks like a proud parent at a graduation ceremony. "You are the finest warriors the Kalarathi Empire has ever produced," he announced, his voice booming across the embarkation bay. "You will make history. You will be the first Kalarathi force to master the human homeworld, and you will return as legends." The soldiers roared their approval, a sound like thunder rolling through a canyon. I recorded every moment as was my duty, and I noticed something interesting. Not all of them were roaring quite as loudly as the other. The journey to Earth took 6 standard cycles, and that is when things started getting weird. Well, weirder. The closer we got to that blue planet, the quieter the soldiers became. They started watching the observation screens with something that almost looked like concern, which was not an emotion you typically saw in Kalarathi shock troops. "Sir," Sergeant Keleveth approached HFY in the command deck on our 4th day of transit. "I have been reviewing the human physiological data again, their bone density ratios, their muscle compression factors, the way their circulatory system operates under their native gravity. It does not make sense." HFY did not even look up from his tactical displays. "What does not make sense, Sergeant?" "How they function at all, sir. According to our models, a species with their structural composition should not be able to walk upright, let alone build a spacefaring civilization. The gravity they evolved under should have crushed them flat." "Then clearly," HFY replied with that infuriating certainty that only the truly arrogant can muster, "our models are missing something. Perhaps they spend most of their time in water, or lying down, or suspended in some manner we have not observed." Kelveth's tail twitched, which in Kalarathi body language is roughly equivalent to a human nervous tic. "Sir, I respectfully suggest we review the human warnings one more time before we commit to surface operations." Now HFY did look up, and his expression was not friendly. "Are you questioning my command decisions, Sergeant?" "No, sir. I am questioning the physics, sir." "The physics," HFY said slowly, "will conform to Kalrathi's superiority, as all things eventually do." "Dismissed." Keleveth saluted and left, but I saw him exchange glances with Captain Drenox and Lieutenant Yavek. They knew something was off. They could feel it in their combat-honed instincts, but orders were orders, and Kalarathi soldiers followed orders even when those orders were being issued by a commander whose ego had apparently achieved its own gravitational field. On the 6th day, Earth filled our view screens, beautiful and blue and completely unconcerned with our arrival. The human delegation had provided us with landing coordinates at a facility they called Edwards Air Force Base, located in a desert region that scans indicated had perfectly standard atmospheric conditions. "Prepare for atmospheric entry," HFY commanded, and I swear, I heard at least a dozen soldiers take deeper breaths than strictly necessary. We were about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between theoretical physics and applied biology. The atmospheric entry was smooth. I will give our pilots that much credit. The transport ships cut through Earth's atmosphere like heated blades through protein gel, our heat shields glowing a satisfying orange as we descended toward the desert coordinates. Through the viewports I could see the human welcoming committee, tiny figures standing near their primitive ground vehicles, probably eager to witness Kalrathi's superiority in action. Oh, if only they knew what they were actually about to witness. Commander HFY stood at the primary airlock, his 4 arms crossed in that pose he had practiced specifically for moments of dramatic arrival. Behind him, Sergeant Kelveth and his squad waited in perfect formation, 200 of the most elite warriors our species had ever produced, all gleaming in their advanced combat exoskeletons. "Remember," HFY announced over the comm system, "we are representing the entire Kalarathi Empire. Exit with dignity, exit with pride, show these humans what true warriors look like." The landing struts engaged with a metallic thud that reverberated through the hull. I felt the ship settle, compensators adjusting for the local gravity. The readouts showed 1.0 standard units exactly as predicted, nothing our people could not handle, nothing our augmentations and exoskeletons could not easily manage. The airlock began its cycling sequence. Atmospheric sensors confirmed breathable air, acceptable temperature, slightly high humidity but well within tolerance. Every single indicator showed green across the board. Vexvor nodded to Kelvoth. Sergeant, you have the honor of being the first Kelrathi to set foot on Earth under combat conditions. Make it memorable. Kelvath's expression, visible through his helmet's transparent faceplate, showed something I had never seen before on a Kelrathi warrior. Hesitation. But orders were orders, and he stepped forward as the airlock doors hissed open, revealing the landing ramp and the bright Earth sunlight beyond. He took one step onto the ramp, then another. His exoskeleton hummed softly, compensating for the gravitational difference, servos whining as they distributed the load. 3 steps down, 4 steps. He was halfway down the ramp when I heard it, a crack. Not a loud crack, more like the sound of someone snapping a dried twig but amplified through the comm system so everyone could hear it. Kelvath stopped. His left leg was bending at an angle that legs, even Kelrathi legs with their reversed bone structure, should absolutely not bend. He looked down at it, his expression shifting from confusion to horror in the span of a heartbeat. Sir, I think he started to say, and that is when his right leg gave out completely. The sound was worse the second time, much worse. It was not a clean snap, it was a wet, crunching, splintering sound that every single warrior in that transport ship heard through their helmet speakers. Kelvath went down like a dropped cargo container, his exoskeleton screaming in protest as it tried and failed to support a body that was literally collapsing under its own weight. He hit the ramp and I heard at least 6 more distinct cracking sounds. His arms, his spine, his hip joints, everything was just coming apart. Medic, someone screamed, and Captain Drenux rushed forward, making it exactly 2 steps down the ramp before his own femur snapped so loudly I heard it over the comm chatter. Then it was chaos. Pure, absolute, horrifying chaos. Drenux fell sideways, crashing into Lieutenant Yavek, who stumbled, whose ankle shattered, who grabbed onto Corporal Thosik for support, whose shoulder joint disintegrated under the additional weight. They went down like dominoes, except dominoes do not scream in agony, and dominoes do not have their bones exploding out through their reinforced combat scales. Everybody stop! Vexvalver roared, but it was too late. The soldiers behind the falling warriors tried to retreat back into the ship, but the press of bodies in the narrow airlock corridor meant they were pushing against each other, and I watched in absolute horror as ribs cracked, as spines compressed, as soldiers who had survived actual combat on high-gravity worlds were being destroyed by the simple act of standing in a crowded hallway. One soldier, Private Jexnar, managed to grab onto the airlock frame to stop himself from being pushed forward. His fingers, his strong, augmented, reinforced fingers, just crumpled against the metal. All 4 of his hands went from functional appendages to broken meat in the time it takes to blink. Dr. Vosmar shoved his way forward, medical scanner already active, and I saw his face go through an entire spectrum of emotions as he read the results. Confusion, disbelief, recognition, and finally pure terror. Get them back inside, he shrieked, his professional composure completely shattered. Get everyone back inside right now. Deploy the gravity cushions. Activate all medical containment fields, and for the love of the eternal void, nobody else move. But moving was the problem. Every movement, every shift of weight, every attempt to help a fallen comrade resulted in more breaks, more fractures, more warriors reduced to broken wreckage inside their useless exoskeletons. Down on the ramp, Kelvoth was still conscious, which was almost worse. He was trying to speak, but his chest cavity had compressed so much that his lung capacity was roughly equivalent to a small balloon. Blood, bright blue Kelrathi blood, was pooling under his shattered body, and standing there just 50 meters away, the human welcoming committee had not moved. They just stood there, watching, their faces showing something between pity and that uniquely human expression that I would later learn was called resigned frustration. Like they were watching someone ignore assembly instructions and break their new furniture. One of them, a human female wearing what appeared to be a military uniform, raised a communication device to her face. Her voice came through our external speakers, calm and patient and infuriatingly sympathetic. This is Colonel Patricia Hoffman, United States Air Force. We have medical personnel standing by. Please transmit your casualty count and inform us if you require assistance with evacuation procedures. We did try to warn you about this. Thexvor stood frozen at the airlock entrance, staring at the carnage that had been his elite strike force. In the span of approximately 90 seconds we had gone from military demonstration to medical catastrophe, and we had not even finished disembarking yet. Dr. Vossmar worked with the frantic energy of someone who had just realized his entire understanding of biology might be catastrophically wrong. He set up a makeshift medical bay in the cargo hold, which was the only space large enough to accommodate the growing number of casualties who could not, under any circumstances, be moved to the actual medical bay 3 decks up. The exoskeletons are not working, he muttered, running his scanner over what remained of Sergeant Kelvath's structural integrity. They are compensating for the gravity. They are distributing the load exactly as designed, but the internal structures are failing anyway. Thexvel loomed over him, his confidence replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. Then increase the exoskeleton support, route more power to the skeletal reinforcement systems, add additional bracing. Sir, Vossmar said slowly, I do not think you understand what I am seeing here. This is not a support problem. This is a fundamental physiological incompatibility problem. Lieutenant Yavek, who had been lucky enough to only shatter his ankle before being dragged back inside, groaned from his medical pod. Just tell us, doctor, what is killing us? Vossmar pulled up a holographic display that showed a comparison between Kalrathi and human skeletal structures. Look at this. Our bones are dense. Yes, incredibly dense. But they are also rich. We evolved on a world with 1.4 standard gravity units, and our bodies adapted by building incredibly strong, incredibly stiff skeletal structures. We are like stone pillars, incredibly resistant to compression from above. He rotated the human skeleton on the display. Humans evolved under 1.0 standard gravity. Their bones are less dense than ours. We knew this. What we did not account for is that their bones are also flexible. Not weak flexible. They have this spongy internal structure, this trabecular bone network that absorbs and distributes stress in multiple directions simultaneously. Captain Drenox, both legs now immobilized in emergency medical frames, let out a pained laugh. So we are too strong? That is what you are telling us? We came to this planet and died because we are too strong? Not too strong, Vossmar corrected, his voice tight. Too rigid. When we experience stress, our bones do what they are designed to do. They resist. They hold firm. Until they do not. And then they shatter completely. Human bones bend. They flex. They distribute the load across their entire structure. Under their native gravity, their bodies are constantly micro-adjusting, constantly compensating, constantly flexing and absorbing impact. I watched as he pulled up another scan, this one showing Kelvath's spine. Look at this. His vertebrae did not gradually compress. They did not slowly fail. They just snapped, one after another, because they tried to stay rigid in an environment that required flexibility. Thexvar was not accepting this. Then we increase the exoskeleton flexibility algorithms. We add dampening systems, shock absorbers, whatever the humans use. Already tried it, sir. Engineering specialist Krenvor called out from the corner where he had been frantically modifying equipment. I added every flexible joint, every shock-absorbing system we have in inventory. Watch. He had rigged up a test frame, basically an exoskeleton mounted on a support structure. He activated it, and the servos whined as the joints moved through their range of motion. It looked smooth, it looked functional, it looked like it should work. Then he attached a dead weight equivalent to Kalrathi body mass. The exoskeleton held for approximately 4 seconds before the joints started heating up. The servos started smoking and the entire apparatus collapsed into a sparking heap of expensive failure. The problem, Krenvor explained, sounding utterly defeated, is that to provide the constant real-time micro-adjustments that human biology does naturally, we would need processing power and energy output equivalent to a small starship reactor for each individual soldier, and even then, we would just be copying what their meat does automatically. A long silence fell over the cargo hold, broken only by the moans of injured soldiers and the beeping of medical equipment. Private Jexnor, his hands now wrapped in so much medical foam he looked like he was wearing 4 white clubs, spoke up from his medical pod. Sir, permission to speak freely? Thexvar nodded numbly. We need to ask the humans for help. You could have heard a feather drop in that cargo hold. A Kalrathi warrior, one of our elite soldiers, was suggesting we request assistance from the species we had come here to prove our superiority over. The species that had warned us repeatedly that this was a terrible idea. Vossmore closed his scanner with a decisive click. The private is correct, sir. We have 17 soldiers with life-threatening injuries, 43 with severe fractures and another 112 with damage that will require extensive surgical reconstruction. We cannot treat them here, we cannot move them safely in this gravity, and we certainly cannot get them back to the ships without causing additional casualties. Thexfar's mandibles clicked in what I recognized as profound agitation. His ego was warring with his responsibility for his soldiers' lives, and I could see the exact moment when responsibility won. Open a channel to the human colonel, he said quietly. Sir? I asked, wanting to make absolutely sure I had heard correctly. Open the channel, he snapped. And somebody please explain to me how a species that looks like it was assembled from spare parts by a drunken engineer managed to build themselves so perfectly for their own planet that we, the Kalrathi, cannot even stand on it without falling apart. Nobody had an answer to that, but I opened the channel anyway, and we prepared to do something the Kalrathi Empire had not done in approximately 300 cycles. We prepared to ask for help. Colonel Patricia Hoffman arrived at our transport ship approximately 12 minutes after Thexfar swallowed his pride and requested assistance. She walked up the ramp, the same ramp that had destroyed Sergeant Kelvath's entire skeletal structure, like she was strolling through a pleasant garden. Behind her came a team of human medical personnel pushing wheeled carts loaded with equipment, and I want you to understand something. They were not walking carefully. They were not moving with the slow, deliberate caution you would use in a hazardous environment. One of them was actually jogging. Jogging. On a planet that had reduced our finest warriors to broken wreckage within seconds. Commander Thexvar, I presume? Hoffman extended one of her small 5-fingered hands in that bizarre human greeting gesture. Thexvar, still in the transport ship and very carefully not moving, touched her hand briefly with one of his own. I saw him wince slightly, probably remembering Private Jacksonar's crushed fingers. Colonel, thank you for responding so quickly to our medical emergency. Of course, she said, and I swear there was no mockery in her voice, just professional courtesy and what seemed like genuine concern. We have experience with off-world species requiring gravitational medical assistance. If you will permit my team, we can begin triage immediately. She gestured, and the human medical staff entered the cargo hold. One of them, a young male whose uniform identified him as Dr. Ben Richardson, immediately knelt beside Kelvath. He dropped his entire body weight onto his knee joints, which according to our scans should have resulted in catastrophic structural failure, and he did it without even thinking about it. Okay, Sergeant, Richardson said, his voice calm and soothing. We are going to get you stabilized and into a low-gravity medical pod. Can you tell me your pain level? Kelvath stared at him with what I can only describe as existential confusion. You are kneeling. Yes. On both knees. Your full body weight is being supported by your knee joints at an acute angle. Richardson glanced down at his own legs as if noticing them for the first time. Oh yeah. I guess it is. Is that a problem for your species? That position would destroy our leg structure in approximately 5 seconds. The human doctor blinked several times processing this information, then looked up at his colleagues with an expression that somehow conveyed both understanding and incredulity. They really are not kidding about the bone density thing, are they? Another human, a woman wearing a white coat, labeled Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, Xenophysiology, stepped forward with a portable scanner. Commander, with your permission, I would like to run some comparative analysis. We need to understand the full extent of the physiological differences if we are going to provide optimal care. Thexvar nodded his consent, probably because what choice did he have at this point? Okonkwo spent the next several minutes scanning various Kalrathi soldiers, and I watched her expression shift from professional interest to something like horrified fascination. Okay, she said finally, pulling up a holographic comparison on her scanner. I think I see the problem. Your bone structure is approximately 3 times more dense than ours, which sounds impressive, except that density and rigidity are not the same as strength under varied load conditions. She rotated the display, showing stress distribution patterns. Your skeletons are optimized for consistent, predictable gravitational load from a single direction. Ours are optimized for chaos. Humans run. We jump. We fall down and get back up. We lift things at awkward angles. We trip over our own feet on a regular basis. Our bones are built to handle impact and stress from literally every possible direction simultaneously. Colonel Hoffman picked up what looked like a heavy equipment case from one of the carts. She lifted it with one hand casually while talking. Our musculature is also different. We have what is called type 2 muscle fibers, fast twitch, designed for explosive movement. Your scans show primarily type 1, slow twitch, designed for sustained force. She set the case down then, and I am not making this up. She dropped to the ground and started doing push-ups, right there, in full uniform, in front of the commander of a Kalarathi military expedition. This is a standard human exercise, she said, not even breathing hard, her body moving up and down in a smooth rhythm. We call them push-ups. We do them to maintain basic fitness. Children do variations of these starting around age 5. Lieutenant Yavek made a choking sound. Your children train by repeatedly supporting their full body weight on their extended arms. Hoffman stood up, again with that fluid ease that seemed impossible given what we had just witnessed happen to our own people. Our children also climb trees, hang from playground equipment, jump off objects significantly higher than their own height, and generally spend their developmental years hurling themselves at the ground and missing. It is how we learn spatial awareness and impact resistance. Dr. Richardson had finished stabilizing Kelveth and was moving to Captain Drenux. Your species is incredibly impressive in terms of raw structural strength, he said. But you are specialists. You evolved to be really, really good at handling one specific type of gravitational stress. We evolved to be generalists, to handle everything from sitting still to sprinting to falling downstairs while carrying groceries. Falling downstairs, Vexvar repeated weakly. Surprisingly common human experience, Hoffman confirmed. Our homes have internal elevation changes that we navigate multiple times daily. It builds bone density through repeated micro-impacts. Okonkwo was reviewing her scanner data, shaking her head slowly. Commander, I am going to be blunt with you. Your soldiers cannot safely operate on Earth's surface, even with the most advanced support systems we could devise. The simple act of existing here puts stress on your skeletal structure that it was never designed to handle. You would need either complete gravitational compensation fields, which is technology nobody has, or you would need to fundamentally redesign your entire species' biology. She looked up at him, her expression sympathetic but firm. Your empire is clearly powerful and your warriors are clearly brave, but evolution does not care about empires or bravery. It only cares about environmental fit. And respectfully, you do not fit here. Vexvar was silent for a long moment, watching as human medical personnel moved efficiently through the cargo hold, treating injuries that their own bodies would have shrugged off as minor inconveniences. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. We thought you were weak. We know, Hoffman said gently. Everyone does at first. Low bone density, no natural armor, relatively fragile compared to most spacefaring species, but weakness and strength are contextual, Commander. We are not weak. We are optimized. There is a difference. And as if to prove her point, one of the human medics accidentally dropped a heavy medical device. It fell, struck the deck with a loud clang and bounced. The medic caught it on the rebound with one hand, laughed, said something about being clumsy and went right back to work. A fall and impact that would have shattered Kalarathi bones was just a minor embarrassment to them. That, more than anything else, drove the point home. The human medical teams worked for 6 hours straight, stabilizing our wounded and carefully, so carefully, transferring them into specially prepared low-gravity medical pods that the humans had apparently stockpiled specifically for scenarios like this. Because of course they had anticipated that some arrogant species would ignore their warnings and break themselves on Earth's surface. The evacuation was humiliating in ways I lack the vocabulary to properly describe. Each Kalarathi soldier had to be placed on anti-gravity sleds, the kind normally reserved for moving heavy cargo, and floated back to the transport ships like fragile pottery. The humans treated us with professional courtesy throughout the entire process, which somehow made it worse. There was no mockery, no gloating, just efficient medical care and what appeared to be genuine concern for our well-being. Colonel Hoffman personally oversaw the final evacuation count, checking off names on her datapad with the same methodical precision our own logistics officers would use. That is everyone, Commander. 17 critical injuries now stabilized, 43 severe fractures immobilized, 112 moderate injuries treated, all personnel accounted for. Vexvar stood in the transport ship's command deck, which he had not left since the disaster began, staring at the display showing our casualties. 200 elite soldiers deployed, 0 successful surface operations completed, 100% casualty rate from simply attempting to exit the spacecraft. Not a single combat injury, he said quietly. Not one. We were defeated by the ground itself. I was still recording, as was my duty, and I made sure to capture his expression. History needed to see this, needed to understand the cost of arrogance. The final count, sir, I reported, pulling up my own data. Medical treatment costs are estimated at 47 million credits. Equipment losses from damaged exoskeletons and support systems, another 23 million. Transport fuel expenditure for emergency departure, 6 million. Damage to the Kalrathi Empire's military reputation among the Galactic Assembly, incalculable. Dexvo's mandibles clicked in bitter amusement. And we never even fired a weapon. We never even conducted a single training exercise. We landed. We fell apart. We begged the humans for help. And now we are retreating with our tails between our legs. To be fair, sir, Lieutenant Yovek called from his medical pod, both legs still wrapped in human-designed stabilization frames. We do not actually have tails. The comment got a few weak laughs from the wounded soldiers, which I suppose was something. Kalrathi humor tended toward the gallows variety in situations like this. The transmission to the Kalrathi High Command took 3 hours to compose. Dexvo wrote 17 different versions before finally settling on one that was honest without being career-ending, though I suspect his career was ending regardless. To the esteemed members of the High Command, he dictated while I recorded, the proposed training operation on Earth has been cancelled due to unforeseen physiological incompatibilities. Our initial assessment of human physical capabilities was fundamentally flawed. They are not weak, they are adapted to an environment that our species cannot safely inhabit without technology that does not currently exist. Recommend immediate reclassification of Earth and human inhabited worlds as biologically hazardous to Kalrathi personnel. Further recommend against any military operations involving human territory unless absolutely necessary, and even then, only in space-based environments. Detailed medical and scientific reports attached. Commander Thex-4, Kalrathi Shock Division, respectfully submitting resignation effective immediately. He closed the transmission and turned to me. Make sure that recording is preserved in the official archives. Every word, every image, every humiliating second of it. If this prevents even one other species from making the same mistake we did, then perhaps this disaster will have served some purpose. The transport ships lifted off from Edwards Air Force Base 6 hours after we had landed, leaving behind scorch marks on the runway and a very expensive lesson in the difference between strength and adaptability. As we cleared the atmosphere, I looked back at Earth through the observation port. That beautiful blue marble, so inviting, so deceptively gentle-looking, a death world hiding in plain sight, inhabited by creatures who thought nothing of the gravity that had destroyed us. General Crostek's voice came over the comm from the second transport. So, Commander, still think they are the softest species in the galaxy? Thexvar was silent for a long moment before responding. No, General. I think they might be the most terrifying. The report reached the Galactic Assembly 3 days later, and the response was, predictably, chaotic. Half the member species thought it was a joke, some elaborate Kalrathi propaganda designed to make humans seem more threatening than they actually were. The other half immediately began recalculating their threat assessments and revising their diplomatic strategies. The Vrexian Confederacy, who had been planning their own expedition to Earth, cancelled it so fast they probably broke their own speed records. The Thurian Collective requested extensive medical data, presumably to avoid making the same mistakes we had. The Zephyrites, bless their paranoid little hearts, immediately classified Earth as a Class 7 death world and banned all surface expeditions indefinitely. Science Adjunct Vexelin, who had been so confident in his analysis of human weakness, submitted a 300-page revision to his original report. The new title was, and I am quoting directly here, Humanity, a case study in why evolution does not care about your expectations. As for Commander Thexvar, his resignation was quietly refused. Instead, he was assigned to the newly created Office of Human Affairs, specifically to advise other Kalrathi commanders on why invading Earth was a spectacularly bad idea. He took to the job with the enthusiasm of someone who had learned a very expensive lesson and wanted to make sure nobody else had to learn it the same way. I visited him in his new office 6 months after the incident. He had a picture on his wall, a human child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, hanging upside down from a tree branch by just her knees, grinning at the camera. That, he said, pointing at the image, is a human juvenile engaged in recreational activity. She is supporting her full body weight with just her leg muscles, sending blood rushing to her head in a way that would cause most species severe medical distress. And she is doing it for fun. He turned to look at me, his expression somewhere between respect and existential dread. We measure military strength by ship counts, by weapon yields, by territorial control. The humans measure it by whether their children can climb trees without dying, and somehow, they built a civilization that spans multiple star systems. Never ever underestimate a species that treats falling as a learning opportunity. I left his office with those words echoing in my head, and I thought about Sergeant Kelvath, about Captain Drenox, about 200 elite warriors defeated by the simple act of standing up. The humans had tried to warn us. They had been polite about it, even sympathetic. They had offered medical assistance before we even asked. They had known exactly what would happen, because it had probably happened before, to some other arrogant species who thought low bone density meant weakness. And here is the final irony, the one that keeps me awake some nights. We still do not really understand them. We know they are dangerous now. We know their planet is lethal to most species. We know they are stronger than they look, but we do not understand how a species that fragile, that poorly armored, that vulnerable to so many environmental factors, managed to become such an effective force in the galaxy. Maybe that is the point. Maybe we are not supposed to understand it. Maybe we are just supposed to accept that the universe is full of surprises, and that sometimes the most unassuming package contains the most devastating contents. Or as Colonel Hoffman told me during our departure, with that peculiar human smile that never quite reaches the eyes, we are not strong because we are built tough, Commander. We are strong because we learn to get back up after falling down. There is a difference. Yeah, there really is. And somewhere in the Kalrathi High Command archives, my complete recording of the disaster sits in a secure file labeled simply required viewing for all flag officers. Why humans are not soft, do not ignore this. 200 elite warriors learned that lesson in the most painful way possible. The rest of the galaxy got to learn